Apple just lost a very big lawsuit in the United States that kind of like demands it now to get rid of the in-app purchase system. Now, we want to talk about how much of this is kind of like media noise and how much of that is actually true, because Apple has been implementing things already that allow you to charge outside of the App Store. But what I would be concerned of is how they do it, because so far they have shown us that they are not the nicest in offering alternatives. So let's take a look at what's going on here, what's happening, and then I want to also give you my feedback and my opinion on what I think will be the future of the App Store. So let's take a look at this. Right now, if you look at the news, you'll see big news. Apple has to stop in-app purchases, all that kind of stuff, or they have to stop enforcing it, right? What it essentially does is it forces Apple to compete with other payment services rather than blocking them. And this is what we wanted all along. That's a quote here in an NBC News article. Now, what's happening is there has been a lawsuit between Epic Games, the creators of Fortnite, and Apple. And they didn't like that they had to pay 30%. And when they moved to an external service, 27% for the processing. Because, you know, normally transaction fees are 3% in the United States because people use credit cards and they want to get their points to travel. And, you know, the points have to come from the merchants taking the payments. That's why we pay 3% to Stripe. They are not necessarily to facilitate the payment. Most of those points will go to Visa, to Amex, to MasterCard, so people can get their points. Can get their miles, get their cash back, right? So the cash back actually takes some of the money out of our pocket and puts it back into the customer's pocket. So they get the illusion of earning money as they spend. That's how credit card companies work in the US. Now, Apple, you know, Apple's cost probably to operate that is about 2 to 3% because they also work with those credit card companies. But, you know, on top of that, there is about 27% that, you know, that is Apple's commission of this. That does not go to paying the credit card companies. So people didn't like that there is this 27 commission if you make more than $1 million. And also the ways that Apple has been doing things when, you know, you actually use your own payment processor. Because Apple, and this is not a new thing, this is out there for some while, you can distribute reader apps with a link to your website. Now, what's a reader app? Apple has this already for a specific application. And I will assume that they will extend this reader application feature now to every application that wants to take payments outside. And it would be, you know, conform with what the judge has ordered, but I wouldn't use it. And let me tell you why. So they already have the system in place. If you're having a magazine, a newspaper app, a book, an audio app, a music app, or a video app, that you can take payments outside of Apple's platform because you do have costs to run that, and you know you may not have good profit margins, and you may be not breaking even by giving Apple 30%. Then they have the specific SDK where you have to request access to, so you can see here with a request form that you have to log into, that you can simply set up some entitlements in Xcode, and you can actually do this with Despia. And you gotta adjust your info.plist file, and then when your app has this link here to make an in-app purchase, there will be a native modal saying you're about to leave the app and go to an external website. You will no longer be transactioning with Apple. To kind of like scare off people, say, hey, you're going to a different website. Are you sure you want to do this, right? And then it opens like the website in an in-app browser. This has been existing for a while for reader applications. They did have some guidelines on the maximum font and all that kind of stuff in there. But this has been existing. I think it may be the Mandela effect, but I kind of like can think back when we thought about implementing some of those things in Despia, that they actually allowed this for all applications. Again, I could be wrong, but you had to have it like purchase with an in-app purchase, and under that button you had to make a little text saying or save 30% on our website, and Apple restricted how big that text could be, which is interesting. If I go to Google and I will do Apple external payments, and let's do Apple App Store external payments, and there was this article here, distributing apps in the US that provide an external payment method. It goes right now to nothing. So that may be in response to the lawsuit potentially. Also, apparently, with this thing that happened before, this article says that before adding an in-app link to an external payment service, developers must request permission to do so from Apple via a newly launched web form. Yeah, we just talked about that. And then it says, by default, the company will apply a 27% fee on top of in-app purchases processed via third-party methods. So even if you bring Stripe to there and you get this scary alert, apparently you still have to pay Apple 27% for payments that you process through there. It will lower the fee to 15% for developers who have signed up to its small business program, right? And this is kind of like bringing back those 3% that goes to the credit card companies so people can book flights and all that kind of stuff with their points. So it will essentially just reduce Apple's costs for this and then just still apply the commission onto you, even if you want to use your external payment method. So until now, you could use your external payment method, but that was just for convenience if you don't want to use Apple's SDKs, because they do lots of client-side validation, and it's not the nicest thing to work with, actually, to use in-app purchases using StoreKit or Android Billing Center. Stripe will always be the best way to process this, or Polar or other merchant of records, right? And this brings me also to another point. Apple has been doing some work, to be fair. They have been acting as a merchant of record for the purchases, meaning they've been doing the support for your app, they've been taking some of the risk, they've been managing chargebacks, right? So if you take a look at their biggest competitor, Paddle, which is essentially providing the same service that Apple does, they have been very active with that lawsuit and all the updates going on with Apple, because if you see, they have this whole section on their website. They have a whole product called Sell Outside of App Stores. And what they are doing is they're giving you kind of like a system that lets you bypass Apple's system, by selling kind of like outside of the App Store for your in-app purchase, but they will still handle fraud prevention, chargebacks, and sales tax. And, you have global tax compliant, optimized checkout. You even get Apple Pay in there, so but without all that percentage. Now, how much does Paddle charge for that? If you take a look at that here at pricing, we will see that they do take 5% plus 50 cents. So, those extra 3% on top of the credit card fees are for, handling the tax compliance, handling the fraud and chargebacks, and, that will go on top of that. So Apple's 30% can be compared to 5% and 50 cents that, Paddle charges, because they do essentially provide the same service that the App Store would provide to you when it comes to tax compliance and, all those kinds of things. So that's what you compare it to. And they do actually, they've been very invested in the Epic Games stuff. They've been making lots of videos about it. And I do think now with this opening up that Paddle will probably release an SDK or something like this to take payments outside of the App Store professionally for mobile applications. And once they do, we will definitely integrate with that natively with Despia. Now, right now, there's a question. When you're submitting your application today, when you're submitting your application tomorrow, next week, should you still use in-app purchases for that? Now, there is a little thing about that. And I did ask ChatGPT about that. Excuse the typo here. But here's the thing. As of May 2025, this previously imposed 27% fee if you're using external payment providers will be removed. There is no saying that this ugly widget will be removed. More than likely, Apple will not do that, because if we take a look at, kind of like how Apple has handled things in the past, they will more than likely only do the most necessary thing possible. So I think we'll keep that widget. They will say it's to protect users' privacy. I can definitely see that. And security, let them know that they're transactioning outside of Apple's secure ecosystem. So you will still have that pop up more than likely. Again, I can't look into the future, but this is a somewhat of an assumption based on what I've seen Apple do in the past. But it could be that they're changing. So what it essentially would be doing, it would get rid of the 27% penalty if you don't use their system, but still use their own, your own provider. Keep in mind that this is outside the App Store, and more than likely also outside the application itself, meaning it will probably repurpose this existing reader technology that they are using, where you click on a link, it opens the modal, and it goes into an in-app browser to let you do the payments and all that kind of stuff, right? It will more than likely not work with using Stripe's SDK, which would be amazing, but it would look too similar to how the App Store Apple Pay looks, because you could just use Stripe Express here, put a checkout with Apple button here, and then it would just open this native widget, and you got one-click purchase, exactly like the App Store does. And a lot of apps are doing this. The Starbucks app is doing this. The Aralo eSIM application is doing this, because they kind of like won the argument that eSIMs are not in-app purchases, right? Because there's actually a physical value to them, even though they're installed electronically, right? Because there's a contract to that eSIM. So there are ways to go around this right now and get the button on here. I do think more than likely, if you're doing your average SaaS, your average indie hacker application for photo editor, for AI, image, SaaS, wrapper, whatever, they will probably, and I'm kind of like making things up here based on what I've seen, they will more than likely not want you to put a Stripe checkout button here with Apple Pay, because then it would look exactly the same. It would just say, instead of App Store, it would say Apple Pay. But people don't know what the difference is, and it would give the illusion that they're transactioning through Apple's secure system, where Apple is the merchant selling it, Apple is on the invoice, Apple acts as a merchant of record, taking on the liability for refunds, taking on the liability for chargebacks, taking on all that kind of liability. Apple will more than likely don't want people to just kind of like misuse an UI that will look like it's them without having be the App Store payment system. So I think there is a good chance that they will go with this version, which definitely will reduce the conversions in your application. So you want to consider, if you're thinking about submitting your application within the next 2 weeks to the App Store, if you really want to go around the in-app purchases, you will probably be able to submit your application as the Reader app. And then when App Review says, hey, it's not a Reader app, you would more than likely have to say, hey, look at the lawsuit here. Or wait till they come up with SDKs and solutions for this, and we will definitely integrate with them. But my honest opinion on this is, I think if you're wanting to get your app out there, and you're somewhat interested in making revenue from your application, even though if it's 15% less, because you can sign up for the small business program to only get 15% commission payments, I would highly suggest you actually to stay within Apple's ecosystem. Because think about it. Now, if Apple has applications on there that are not using in-app purchases, and you are the App Store owner, would you put them on top of the listings? Would you promote applications that you're not making money from? More than likely not. And I can see, Apple will have to give up some of those positions, definitely, because of the lawsuit, but they're not going to make it easy for you. So even though those are big news, realistically speaking, if you're interested in getting your application out there, if you're interested in making money from your application, getting your application discovered, having good conversions within your applications, I do think that all alternative methods that Apple is now forced by court to implement will probably ruin your conversions, will probably not be good for getting sales, and I think your best option will be going with their own system. It's probably not what you want to hear, but Apple has the history of doing things like this, and those are conversion killers. So rather by killing your conversion by 80%, I'll rather pay 15% to Apple to get to $1 million in revenue, and then I can always sue them or whatever and figure things out once you're making the money. Because 15% is actually not that bad, especially if you consider that mobile app in-app purchases are considered high-risk transactions. So if you take the fact that Apple essentially is a high-risk merchant account, it will probably increase the transactions that the transaction fee that competitors would charge. We can go to ChatGPT real quick and we can ask, what is a fair commission rate, fair commission slash payment processing rate for a high risk MOR? Because here's the thing, in-app purchases are considered high risk because, you know, high risk means there are lots of refunds, there are lots of disputes filed with those generally, and I think you're actually getting a good deal. If we take a look here at ChatGPT's suggestion, it will say 7 to 15% is a fair transaction amount for a high-risk merchant account. Now, high-risk merchant accounts are used in two places, websites like OnlyFans and the App Store, because those are high-risk purchases. There are lots of refunds happening, lots of disputes happening, lots of people who may use fake credit cards to get things. All those kinds of things add on top of the commission that people pay for the risk that your app brings to their system. So I do think the small business program from Apple, the 15%, very fair, because you consider that an application in-app purchase is high risk and they are a merchant of record dealing all the taxes, all the filings for you. I think getting started with a small business program is a fair rate, right? You see ChatGPT suggesting the industry rate 7 to 15%, which is what I think for a high-risk merchant account, that is a high-risk merchant of record, not even a merchant account, because merchant account means you do the taxes, merchant of record means they do the taxes. So I think 15% is fair. So if you're trying to get your application out there, let's get you started with doing in-app purchases for the 15% if you want to integrate with their system. I think it will be the best to improve your sales, to get new people purchase your in-app purchases, and to have a great purchase experience. Also reduce all the liability that you have with chargebacks and refunds and all that kind of stuff. And then it also has a breakdown here. Base processing fee is 2.9 to 4.5 based on if you're like using MX or not. The risk premium will probably be an additional 6% due to the transaction risk. And this is what lots of payment providers are doing, right? And then MOR services, 1.5%, right? This is kind of like what Paddle does, right? So that they handle the taxes, compliance, and chargebacks. And, this is kind of like what an example is where, you get the 15%. Because you have to pay the 15% because of the service that's attached that Apple is doing for you. Now, most people think, hey, they just take payments. No, the App Store handles compliance, handles taxes, handles all those kinds of things that customer support, customer refund requests, they handle everything for you. Plus, it's a high-risk purchase, which will put you into the bucket where you will pay an extra 5 to 10% just because of the nature of the transaction. And then they also have to pay money to the credit card networks if people are using credit cards. So this has to all be calculated. So I think 15% is very fair. I would love if Apple brings it down 15% also for developers making more than $1 million. That would be even fair. They may do that. In contrast to also offering ways to go outside of the App Store. I wouldn't get your hopes up too big that this will be a valuable solution for your SaaS, for your application, because it does look ugly and it does add friction to a checkout process that should just be click, pay. But this is up to you if you want to kill your conversions to save money in processing fees. Definitely go with that. But I think the money you are losing while doing this will be less than the money you will be spending to use Apple's merchant of record and high risk system, right? And this is probably something you want to consider. So here's my honest opinion when it comes to in-app purchases. And I think, of course, there will be lots of hype, lots of videos, but this is what I've seen based on submitting lots of applications, seeing lots of applications be submitted with Despia to the App Store, and what people have been reporting back to us. So now you know the inside scoop. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate that, and I hope that you get approved by the App Store. Take care. Bye.